Welcome to Delta Mike News. Once upon a time, there was a British Prime Minister who drank tea with dictators, who was an inspiration to many in communist East Europe and also admired by a Middle England frightened to death by contemporary culture and art. She, of course, was Margaret Thatcher. You either loved her or hated her. If you loved her, then Maggie tamed the unions, developed an enterprise culture, got rid of unprofitable big industries and spearheaded the notion that everyone, including the poor, should stand on their own 2 feet in life. And don't forget, she was the first woman Prime Minister in Britain. If you hated her, then the Iron Lady smashed the unions, destroyed the coal industry, cut public services and made life difficult for the poor and minorities of all shapes and sizes. She freed up the economic sector, embraced greedy neoliberalist ideas which inevitably led to the banking mess we are now all paying the bill for. She also was, according to this view, a woman, but with no interest in promoting women's rights. Indeed, her way of dealing with men was to proverbially clobber them over the head with her handbag. Even her biggest ally, Ronald Reagan, said Maggie gave him a handbagging when the US invaded the British Commonwealth territory of Grenada. Outside Britain, Maggie, or the Iron Lady, whichever you prefer, was watched with interest. The Kremlin geriatrics referred to her as a nuclear maniac. But when Gorbachev came along, she was quick to tell her gun-slinging partner Rani in Washington that here is a man we can do business with. This wasn't the first time a British Prime Minister had successfully urged caution with Washington's often trigger-happy fingers. Others out east admired her, such as Lech Walesa in Poland and the aristocrat Václav Pavel in Czechoslovakia. In the end, they went on to dismantle the social fabric of the state after the fall of communism. Actually, both the USSR and East Europe were never really models of communism as Karl Marx envisaged. The tough image of the Iron Lady appealed to many abroad, many of whom had no idea of what she and her blue-rinse Tories were doing to Britain. They never heard such statements as, "There is no such thing as society," or comments about people who used public transport, her open gloating over the plight of the miners' families, and so on. Neither did those admirers see that sending a British task force to the Falklands, or Malvinas if you prefer, was the ideal political move to score a patriotic victory in the 1983 election with the help, of course, of Murdoch and the rest of the Tory press. Now, she may have despised General Galtieri of Argentina, but it never stopped her from having tea with Chile's fascist dictator Pinochet, who sold his soul and country to Nixon's CIA in the 70s by ousting Salvador Allende. Back home, though, her faithful wanted her to turn on permissive Britain. After 1 decade of her rule, Maggie's dear husband, the country club Tory Dennis Thatcher, complained to her about lefties in the BBC. He said, 10 years of Tory government and the buggers are still there. But Maggie didn't take on the so-called liberal media. She didn't need them with all the Tory press at her beck and call. Indeed, to her credit, she even gave more funding for the BBC's World Service, quite unlike her disciples in Downing Street today. But it wasn't all sweet music. For instance, gays were hit with Clause 28, a school bully's manifesto that criminalised open discussion of homosexuality in the classroom. You know, it all reminds me of a newcomer to the world stage, namely Pope Franciscus. Now, his patron saint was Francis of Assisi. Now, you may remember Margaret Thatcher quoting a poem by St. Francis on the steps of Downing Street after her first election victory. "Where there is disunity, Let us bring harmony, and so on. 3 decades later, the seeds of a lack of harmony still bring hardship and tragedy to millions of Britons. Worst of all, it reinforced a latent xenophobic complex promoting disunity among mankind, thus hindering the efforts to solve global problems. After Margaret Thatcher, we did not all live happily ever after.